Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Welcome to Wholesale Change, the webcast and podcast from Distribution Strategy Group, where we offer thought leadership for wholesale change agents like you. Because if you're not a wholesale change agent, you shouldn't be on this show. Right, Jonathan?
It's a stark reminder, yes.
My name is Ian Heller with Distribution Strategy Group. I'll be your co-host today, along with my business partner. He's the prognosticator of product demand and the doctor of distribution, Jonathan Bine, PhD. Jonathan, how are you today?
Looking forward to working with you today, Ian. Thank you.
Me too. We have a fantastic guest. We're very excited to have this conversation. He's very animated. He's very interesting. He has a lot to say, a lot to offer. But before we do that, I want to thank Epicor. The show is brought to you by Epicor, who for nearly 50 years has helped distributors stay ahead with flexible, powerful solutions designed to increase sales, streamline operations, and improve customer experience. Epicor's industry-leading ERP solutions are built specifically to meet the unique needs of wholesalers, with everything needed to grow your sales, profits, and productivity while distancing yourself from your competition. Epicor is focused on the things that matter to you: work queues, PO variance queues, kitting, assembly and production orders, advanced inventory forecasting, VMI, and special project pricing. They build their software using industry best practices and 50 years of distribution experience. But Epicor solutions are far more than just tools for pick, pack, and ship. Fully cloud-based with modern UI, Epicor offers complete, robust e-commerce solutions, powerful BI and analytical tools, modern API and EDI, value-added services, WMS, virtual assistants, and much more. You can learn more about how Epicor helps thousands of wholesalers succeed by visiting epicor.com. Please don't forget to ask us questions today. We love to have questions. We'll get them in and ask our guest. And you want to talk a little bit about our guest and then introduce him, Jonathan?
Please welcome Chuck Cohen onto the show. Chuck is, hey, Chuck.
Hi, Chuck.
Hi, Ian. Hi, Jonathan.
How are
So,
you?
Chuck, the length of your resume belies the depth of experience that you have. Tell us about how you got into distribution and tell us about Benco Dental.
So the length of my, it just reflects that I'm the third generation co-owner of a family business. So the most important title that I had in my career was son, right? So like that's really was the secret to my success. So my distribution career actually started when my career at Benco started. So the company was founded by my grandfather in 1930. We're a third generation family business, just finished our 90th year in business. We're a little unusual in that we are only in our third generation, even though we've been in business for 90 years, because my grandfather started relatively early. My brother and I run the business. We're co-managing directors and co-owners. We run the business on a day-to-day basis. I started at Benco directly out of college in 1989. Actually, before that, I was the first marketing director of Benco when I took a year off between high school and college. At the time, marketing was really not something most distributors did. So I spent a year getting that off the ground. Then I went to college. Then I was a territory rep and had increasing responsibility. And I've been with Benco for my entire career.
And what a run it's been. You're the third largest dental distributor in the US, is that right?
We are, that's right. So there's, in our space, so we sell everything that you see in a dentist's office, right? So from the chairs that you sit in, so the big capital equipment, to the gloves and the filling materials and instruments. So we sell everything in a dentist's office. We are currently the third largest player in the space in the United States. The two bigger ones are both public companies, and we're probably, in the dental space at least, one of the top 2 or 3 largest family-owned businesses around the world. So proud of that, and proud to be a privately held family business. Love family business in general. Not every day, of course, for those of you who are in family businesses, but most days it's pretty great.
So I just have a kind of detailed question. So the players above you are Shine and Patterson. Where does Owens and Minor fit in dental?
So Owens and Minor is one of the largest medical distributors in the world, but they don't do anything in dental. So dentistry is the part of healthcare that you kind of forget is part of healthcare until it's time to go to the dentist twice a year. But there are a number of players like McKesson and Owens and Minor that are in the medical side of healthcare distribution, but don't do anything in dental. It's not quite as similar as it first appears. Like, yes, we all sell gloves, medicine and medical and dental distributors, but there's a lot of special equipment and special consumable products that are specialized to dentistry. So it'd be hard, unless they want to do an acquisition, it'd be hard for a medical distributor to just get into dental.
Interesting. And I think, so our listeners can relate, it seems like a large part of what you sell, if I could use the term, is dental MRO.
Dental MRO, that is a good term for it. So about 60 to 70% of what we sell would be what we would call consumables, and that would be the MRO you're talking about, everything from disposables to specifically dental products. About 25% of our business is capital equipment, which we not only sell, but we design the space around it and we install it and service it after the sale. So if a dentist has a dental chair that doesn't go up and down because the hydraulic lift is broken, we would send the technician in to fix it. And we also sell parts to go along with that. And then about 5% of our business is services. So the analogy is correct. Mostly what we sell is a lot of disposables for dental practices.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Now you had
It is. So hopefully nobody decides to get into it. I love my space. It's great. It's a secret out there. So let's keep it quiet. All right. We don't want
this is Chuck's sandbox. Nobody
Exactly.
Okay. We got this. So you had an amazing insight about what your business needs to do around data. And I want to preface this before you give what will be, I'm sure, a very thoughtful answer. So everybody thinks they have bad data. And we've seen this, we've looked at literally billions and billions of transaction data from companies 2 million to 20 billion, and everybody thinks they have bad data. But you had an insight that goes beyond just how do we get beyond bad data and do more. Talk to us, if you will, about what spurred you to move into such an aggressive digital transformation with a huge emphasis on analytics.
Yeah, so hopefully this is insightful. We'll try. So when Jonathan reached out and said that we want to do an interview, what could we talk about? I immediately thought of digital transformation because that's one of our challenges / opportunities that's going on right now. And I think in order to understand it, at least the way I think about it, I think we have to start with a guy that I think most of us have heard of, a gentleman named Jeff Bezos. So Jeff Bezos, clearly one of the great entrepreneurs, business leaders of our century, right? I mean, the richest man in the world. And for most of us, a competitor on some level, right? Because I think that they are, no matter what space you're in, Amazon is a competitor, right? I think the insight that Jeff Bezos had about a decade or 2 decades ago, decade and a half ago, that he doesn't get a lot of credit for. So like when you think about Jeff Bezos and you read the books and stuff, the customer-centric side, the Amazon, the AWS side, all that stuff, I think he gets a lot of credit for. The thing that I think is actually the most powerful insight of Jeff Bezos that he doesn't get any credit for is this idea that every business is an IT/data business that happens to do something else, which is really a profound business. So when you look at Bezos's career, right, what you see is that the books was just a place to start. He wanted to create an IT business that also sold something else. Now, for 80 years at Benco, and I think for most distributors out there, we think of ourselves as distributors. We're a dental products distributor. We sell dental products. And when we were really thinking bigger, my father, who's still involved in the business, would say something like, well, we've already got the shelves and we've got the conveyors. So if dentistry ever goes out of style, we'll just sell shoes or something else. So his concept was, we're a distribution business that happens to sell dental products. I think what we learned from Bezos is, no. Every business needs to think of itself first as an IT/data business that happens to do something else. So the way we apply that at Benco is to say, we're an IT data business that happens to sell dental products. And when you reorder the priorities in that way, I think it really changes the way a business and business leaders think about the strategy of their business. So what you start thinking about is, wow, number one, do we have enough data people on our team? Number two is, if that's true, then the most valuable resource we have is our data. And what are we doing with it? How are we leveraging it? What are we learning from it? How do we apply things like artificial intelligence and other tools to that data to try to get the most value out of it? Again, happen to sell to dentists, happen to distribute dental products. At our core, we need to think of ourselves as an IT/data operation that does something else in an ancillary fashion.
Talk about big, hairy, audacious goal. That's a massive goal. So when you start to think about the transformation, what are the steps that you're taking? What's happening in that transformation? How do you go about it?
So it is a big, hairy, audacious goal, but if we're going to compete with Amazon as an industry, and I think on some level, all of us compete with Amazon, right? We need to think like they think. We need to understand what they're doing, and we need to compete with them head on. Otherwise, we run the risk of falling behind. And one of the great things about this insight, and then I'll answer your question, is that, on some level, listen, I don't think we'll ever have as many data scientists as Amazon has. I get that. But that doesn't mean we can't have a few, and we can't have a number that's requisite to the size of our business. It doesn't mean we have to do nothing. There's an interim step. Like, we don't need to do as well as Amazon. We need to do certain things really well in order to compete with them. So where it started for us, in answer to your question, is we realized about 3 or 4 years ago that we needed to do a wholesale tear out of all of our IT foundational infrastructure, right? Everything had gotten to the point where it needed to get replaced, probably all at once. So we looked at an ERP conversion. We were looking at other systems that attach to our ERP and figuring out what do we need to change about that? How do we become more IT driven? And then about the same time, we started thinking about the data and the data resources we have. Part of the insight came from my son, who I know you've interviewed, I think on this show before, Benjamin, who has Proton AI, and he really took a whole different approach to leveraging data in his business. So it's a separate business, but I've tried to learn from him because, if you can't learn from your kid, then who can you learn from? And he really has been very helpful in getting us to understand how best to leverage this power of data. So the answer to your question is wholesale tear out and rebuild of the foundational IT infrastructure, as well as different thinking about the data that we have in the business already. Every day, there's terabytes of transactional data that we generate that honestly we do okay with, but not nearly what we should or could do with.
So Chuck, can I just interject real quick,
Please.
Jonathan? So Chuck, first of all, the three of us on this call share the reality that we have sons who are much smarter than we are.
Absolutely. There's no question about that.
Right. And so I think having humility about that generation is often very beneficial to your thinking, right? But
we've got experience on our side at this point.
That's
the
right.
lines will cross eventually, but not yet.
Damn right. And we're good bullshitters, and that helps a lot too.
I was going to say that. I agree. I'm still on a little bit of the pedestal because they haven't learned to remove that last bit yet. But I think, one thing you mentioned the amount of transaction data that you have. And so when we go see distributors, and I remember the first project we ever worked on together, Jonathan, that was your first view of distribution, and you were astonished at how much transactional data there is. I mean, you look at the average, I don't know how many fields of data there are on a distributor transaction, but there's dozens of them. It's not like retail where people come in and you don't even know who they are, right? But distributors aren't doing that much with that data, generally speaking. And Chuck, it sounds like that's what you kind of came to the conclusion of, that there was a lot more intelligence in that data that you could use.
Well, I'll go one step farther into what you said, which is not only do we have terabytes of data that we're not leveraging to the point we should be, we have data that other people would kill to have. In our world, for example, every dental manufacturer, and I think this is true of everyone who's listening today who's a wholesale distributor, every manufacturer would kill and probably pays for the data that we already have in our systems that we basically get for free, part of the transaction. Amazon would kill for the data that we have. We have complete data pictures of purchasing profiles for customers that Amazon and others would die to have, that every startup in America in our spaces would die to have. So the answer to your question is, I don't want to make it like we've done nothing with that data. We've done some stuff with it, but are we leveraging it to its maximum extent? The answer is no, we're not. None of us are. I don't think we are. Maybe Amazon does. I don't know. But most of the distributors that I know are not.
So you think you could provide value to your suppliers with this data if you did the right things with it? Is that what I'm hearing?
I don't think there's thinking about it. There's absolutely 100% we could. So part of it isn't, one of the things, again, I learned from my son is he said, I'm hiring a data scientist, Dad. And I said, what's a data scientist? Like, I had no idea what a data scientist was. I remember we hired the first time one of my guys who happened to run our marketing team came, and it was about 12 years ago or so. And he said, we need to hire an analyst. And I said, what's an analyst? And he said, well, it's a guy, it happened to be a guy who's going to take all this data and figure out. I said, I don't think we need that. We have a thing that runs reports. Like it was an education for me to understand that. Now we're to the point where, we need data scientists working for us. But really, one thing I learned from my son is you need the right people with the right training, working with the right tools to really leverage that data, because it's lots and lots of data, but without the insights and the tools and the people to figure out what to do with it, you're just banging your head against the wall.
Well, just a note of caution on any professional that has the term scientist in their name. Computer scientist, my training, dubiously a science.
Got it. Understood.
Social science, I rest my case. So
agreed.
Hopefully data scientists can redeem the entire category of fields that have the name scientist in their category. But yes.
So what I would add is that a wise man, because when we've grown the business up, getting to a higher level of people has been one of our challenges, like everybody, I think, who's gone through this transformation. And the insight that someone shared with me years ago, the difference between a controller and a CFO is a controller shows up with the reports, a CFO shows up with the reports and insight into what they mean and what to do with them. I didn't understand the difference until someone explained that to me. I think the same thing is true here. An analyst and or a data scientist, they show up with insights on what to do with the data, because that's really what we need. Because otherwise it's just too big and too grandiose a project to make sense out of. But really smart data scientists and analytics people understand how to help us as business leaders make better decisions for how we run our business.
Have you run into challenge getting this talent?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because newsflash, we're located in northeastern Pennsylvania, not exactly a hotbed of data scientists, right? So prior to COVID, hiring someone in this area to do this kind of job was very, very difficult. We've actually taken to some extent growing our own. Basically, we have one person who works for us who started as an analyst, and we paid for him to go back to school because we thought he had the right talent. So we've looked to grow our own. Now with COVID, in a post-COVID world, we're hiring people who are not necessarily based in our headquarters, which makes it a lot easier. But absolutely, every business in America is looking for people who have this skill set, and they are hard to find and, P.S., expensive.
Yeah, because if you go back to your earlier premise that all of us are in the IT business that do something else, if everybody follows this, just the shortage is going to get worse. It's going to get extreme, right?
There's no question. And we all need to find ways to lap the competition, whether it's an operation overseas where you can leverage the cheaper talent that's overseas, or growing your own, or hiring people who don't necessarily come to your home office. Whatever it is, we all need to be on the hunt for IT people. The good news is, I think as distribution businesses, we have a lot to offer these people. Number one is they can be heroes. Number two is we can afford to pay them fairly well. And number three is I think we're good, stable places to work. Not everyone wants to throw their hat in the startup ring. People sometimes like to have a stable place to work where they can put down some roots. And those are the people that we all need to go out and find. It's not easy though.
So, one thing, I teach analytics at the University of Colorado Business School. I've taught it for 6 years. And
would you send me your number one class graduate? Because
I'd be happy to. I
Absolutely.
Can send you.
Thank you.
But one of the things I have the students do is, to your point, they have to do an economic impact analysis of whatever thing they're doing. So we did a project for a large distributor, actually trying to predict lead time from the supplier. The supplier gives a lead time. We know it's wrong. The analytics predict the lead time, and it saves X $100 million in working capital if they follow those things. So I would think that you can justify the growth of this by looking at what they do and measuring the economic impact.
There's no question. Now, measuring dollars and cents can sometimes be difficult, and it can be a distraction sometimes. But I think the essential insight, Jonathan, to what you just said, which I think is just so very, very profound, right? And I'm not overstating when I say that, is not only do we all have data, but what you just identified is we all have data that's in silos in the organization, right? So there's a bunch of people I'll speak for Benco, there's a bunch of folks in the purchasing department that have all this data around lead times. And they're the only ones who have it.
Mhm.
And then there's a whole bunch of people in customer service or people on the sales side. If you can marry up the lead time data, right, with the sales data, with the customer data, you can put together an insight, which is not a complex insight, except that it requires somebody to figure out how to get different pools of data to all interact with each other, right? So I think that when you gave the example you gave, I mean, lead time data is probably something that most of us don't even think of as data, right? That's like where we're calling to find out where the product is because we didn't get it yet. It's not considered data like you'd consider, oh, what is the customer purchase history for, Dr. Smith or Jones Incorporated? That we think of as data. But there's all kinds of little pools of data in our organizations that we're not A, identifying as data, and B, marrying it up so that there's one place, one tool where people can all find it together. I'll give you one example that worked for us and has been one of the great insights. When we started using Proton AI in our organization, one thing that Benjamin and his team figured out is that there's a whole bunch of data in the unfulfilled shopping carts on our e-commerce site. I never thought of that before. Amazon does that all the time, right? Like you went to search for it, but you didn't buy it. Well, we had that data in our system, but it wasn't getting to the sales rep who could then make it actionable. Now, through Proton AI, we've actually done that. And what we've ended up with is sales rep walks in and says, hey, you might be interested in hand pieces. And the customer goes, how'd you know? We don't want to be too creepy about it, right? But we try to say, hey, we think you might be interested in this. Here's a special. And then we can actually convert that data into actionable sales. It's a huge insight, but most of us aren't doing it.
So when you talk about marrying data, before we start to talk about the specific things you're doing in analytics, how do you arrange the marriage of data? What are the things that you've gone through to allow data to get married?
So it's a good question. And I would say, and again, this is not something that I think we're really good at yet. It's just something we're working on. It's a journey, right? I'm not sitting on this panel saying, I have the perfect marriage and we never have any problems. And I'm here to say we have a marriage that's a little ugly sometimes, right? And the marriage we're talking about here is that the way we handle data. So the first thing we've done is we had this transformation around upgrading all the foundational pieces. And among that is where we keep the data, right? To make sure that we've got the right tools and the right systems to keep the data. And the second thing that we've done, which is very related, but doesn't directly answer your question, is we took an inventory of all the people who use the data, and we tried to figure out how we can get them all to be on the same team so that they don't duplicate effort, right? So we found out when we actually started looking under every couch and corner and every corner of the business, we had a lot of people using data and oftentimes working on the similar or same project, but doing it from a different perspective and different team, using different sets of data, using different skills. And this was very inefficient. So in our organization, one of the things we did was we started figuring out and it took us a couple of years to do it, how can we centralize all the people who oversee and manage the data into one place so that we can leverage that to the best extent we can and make sure they're working with the right tools.
Okay, and so does this mean data warehouse, data mart kind of things?
Yes, so data warehousing would be part of it, and also a central data and analytics team. In our organization, again, putting all the dirty laundry on the table, in our organization, people who understood how to manage data, like the data jockeys, were very, very hard to come by. So if you were lucky enough to get the HR team to actually get you one, you did not want to give that person away, right? Like this is a person, because you actually had this person on your team that you could ask a question to and they would come back with an answer. So they were very valuable players on the team. And if you were, lucky enough in your function to have one or two of them, you protected them very closely and you didn't want somebody else to come and steal them, right? And the second thing was, getting the team to really part ways with some of that and start thinking about how can we get those people, like my favorite person, and how do I get them to maybe be part of a centralized team, was very difficult. At the same time, same thing about the data warehouses, and I don't really understand the specifics of it that much, except to say that we had different ways of tracking the data in the organization. And if you happen to have one that worked, you may not be so eager to share the access to it with somebody outside because you had something that worked. And if you shared it, then you couldn't get access to that stuff when you needed it for your own self.
Got it. And so as part of the centralizing, I know you've gone through an ERP reimplementation. Is it a cloud ERP?
So we are doing a cloud ERP. Yes, we're doing the Infor system, and we are doing a cloud ERP. So we are in the process of doing that ERP conversion now. At the same time, parallel, we are changing a bunch of other systems, and we've also made the decision, it's related but not directly, to centralize all of our data and analytic people into one department with a direct line to our head of IT and a dotted line to the specific function that they serve. Took us a couple of years to get everyone to agree to that. It was not an easy set of conversations.
I'm imagining, yeah, departments just trying to reclaim the people that are now dotted line. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a lot of trust on the part of the senior leadership team, and we do, thankfully. It's a great team and they work together. And this is not about people not being team people. It's just about, how do I get my projects done? Everyone's got a very legitimate concern, which is, I want to make sure that my stuff that I think is very important, like the sales leader, understanding the commissions program and analyzing that, and the customer service leader analyzing customer data, and the marketing person analyzing pricing data. Everyone wants to make sure their projects get done in what we all know is a very limited resource environment.
Hey, Chuck, I have a question for you. So you mentioned Benj taking the abandoned shopping cart data and then giving that to the sales reps so they can follow up on those inquiries in person. And, I remember several years ago, I read a book called Big Data, and one of their main points was, a lot of times the greatest value out of a data set is not what that data set was invented for, right? And so you find a secondary use for the data, and they give a bunch of examples. Like, for example, when you look at traffic on your phone, that comes from cell phone tower switching data. That data set was invented for that, but it's a great way to provide navigation and traffic information. So did you guys ever come together, or do you think it would be useful to come together and just say, okay, what is all the data that we have, and what could be the value that we could get out of it? Would that be a useful exercise?
It's 100% useful exercise. We've done it a little bit so far, and we've come up with a few insights along the way. One was the shopping cart data. I can think of some other ones, but the lead time data, what gets back ordered, and the answer is yes. But what we also decided was, in order to get the full value out of the inventory, first we had to get someone to lead the effort who really knew what they were doing. So where we are now in that process is, we're actually on the search for a director of data and analytics reporting into the HR team, or the IT team, so that we really have someone and a team of people who can help us figure all that out. But really it starts with, and it's a word that I think everyone listening to this podcast is familiar with, but not one we normally use, an inventory. We started by taking an inventory of the data, the pools of data, the different, the spreadsheets and everything that people have, the places the data is housed, and the people we have working with that data. And it yielded insights. One of the ones which I shared with you guys before is, I was surprised to find out we have 28 people in our organization, all of whom are some version of data analysis people, which right. I thought was a big number. But the challenge is, we've got one over here and two over here and one over here, and two people. We don't leverage it. And so the answer to your question is, absolutely. We are finding insights just by saying, we're going to just go look everywhere for the data, and then we're going to figure out how we can better use it, even for ways it's not otherwise intended.
It seems like also you're going to get a lot of efficiencies out of that, right? Because if you get 28 people, but you don't have a strategy for your analytics, then they're going to do a lot of event-driven ad hoc stuff rather than, getting a plan together with some strategic objectives for your data, not only how you're going to gather, but we're trying to learn from it. And and just to wrap up, in your case, you're having the CIO lead that, and I would say in some organizations, they're probably having the CFO lead that. Does that depend on the individuals that you have in those jobs as to who the right choice is? And does what you're doing with analytics require a CIO with different strengths than what have traditionally been seen to be required in that role?
It's a really, really good question. So number one is, we happen to have a very talented team, and we have a very talented CIO as well as a talented CFO. The CIO we have embraced this as a project and really was interested in it. And so it was a great place to put it. It also had an added advantage, and I may insult some CFOs on the call who are listening when they hear me say this, but Data can be weaponized, especially by aggressive CFOs. And one of the things I kind of liked about putting it in our organization, not that our CFO would do that because she wouldn't, she's wonderful. And I don't want to say this would be a problem that she would have because I really don't think she would, but I've met CFOs at different places. CFOs who like control of the numbers and control of the dollars can weaponize that level of information and use it in a way that does not promote love and teamwork in the organization, but instead results in finger pointing, sometimes subtle.
Gotcha.
I really liked one thing that was an added benefit of our decision to house this operation within the IT area was that it was a neutral place where the data and the information would not be weaponized by somebody who might use it in not teaming sort of way.
I never thought about that. I think that's brilliant. And I have known CFOs who are like the ones that you have, like the one that you have, who would use it to help, and others who use it as, I'm going to pull it out in the meeting and shoot you with it.
It's a great word that we don't use enough. It's an SAT word, a cudgel. A cudgel is an old-fashioned word for like a stick that you hit it. So not necessarily a gun. They're not going to shoot you with the data.
Fair enough.
But it's a cudgel. And when budget time comes around, they're going to bring out this data that they've got access to that you don't have, and they want to use it as an excuse to get something done that they want done. So, data can be weaponized. We want to have an organization where it's not, and we want to put it in a place where everyone goes, yeah, it's a neutral place over there, and it works really well.
That is an unbelievably great insight. Thanks.
So Chuck,
No comment.
what are some of the, so we know you've got the cross-selling in place through Proton, through your son Benj, and I know it's going well. What are some of the other things that you're looking at in terms of advanced analytics, predictive analytics, even ML and AI?
Sure. So one of the most interesting things that we found out in our journey on data and analytics is the simplest questions are the hardest ones to answer. So I'll give you one that we're sort of struggling with now. And well, I'll give you two we're struggling with now. So one is we're struggling with customer churn. In our business, at least, we have, if we could just figure out a way to not lose any customers, we'd own the market. I mean, it's that old Michael Treacy thing about, you got certain customers coming in and certain customers going, and how do you prefer? But in our organization, what is a churning customer mean? Is it a big customer who becomes a smaller customer? Is it a smaller customer who goes to zero? Is it a customer
it's not like Verizon or Comcast when they define churn?
No,
right?
It's not. I mean, in any of our businesses, I think the concept of customer churn can be defined a myriad of different ways. So a very simple question is a pretty complicated one to answer, at least in our world. So that's one example. Another thing we're struggling with a little bit, to be honest, is the cost to serve. What does it cost to serve? We're facing a big decision, for example, in one of our distribution centers over the next few years. We've pretty much outgrown it. One option is, do we get a bigger distribution center? Another option is, do we totally automate it with robots and all kinds of stuff and have it be all automated, and we still have people, but it's all working with machines, but a smaller footprint? They're each the right answer. And really, without a strong cost to serve model, it's very hard to come up with the right answer to that question. Now, we're a Waypoint client, so we're trying to use Waypoint to do that. But these are two questions that on their face are very, very simple. Like, how much does it cost us to put out an order? What are we doing to figure out which customers are leaving us or going to leave us or have left us already? Those are simple questions that you need the right data and the right people to answer, and they are complicated to answer.
And they're also very emotional. So if you don't have the data, you get people who are very passionately and sincerely arguing from a point of belief that's really not data supported in many cases.
There's no question. So I have a phrase that I use a lot, and I'll make the story very, very short, but basically everybody has their own map, right? And I won't tell you the story that goes behind it, but one of the leadership insights is everyone has their own map. The CFO has one map, and the sales leader has another map, and I, as the managing director, have the third map. And what generates the information on the map is the data. It doesn't mean that their map is wrong. It just means that one person has a map of Pennsylvania, another person has a map of the United States, and the third person has a map of Illinois. Well, you're not going to have alliance on how to resolve this if you're all looking at a different map. And so the answer to your question, Ian, is yeah, if everyone's not aligned on the map that they're looking at, which is the data, and everyone's not aligned on how they're solved, then you're going to have emotional answers that are not data-based. And really, you end up having more stress and not less.
It's interesting. So if you look at what a Verizon or a Comcast does with churn, Verizon will take their customers 1 to 70 million each month, and they're running actually neural networks. The professor that did it is based at the University of Colorado. There's a company close by that is the vendor. They'll stack the customers 1 to 70 million in terms of likelihood to churn. They have enough data that they can actually recommend a specific intervention. So let's say they take the top 5% most likely to churn, right? So Chuck, based on your profile, you need acceleration on when you can buy your next phone, for a lower price. Ian needs acceleration on number of anytime minutes. Jonathan needs an intervention where he gets more data. So I think there are interesting models that we have in the consumer world that can be applied if we can figure out how to define churn, right?
That's it. And you said it right. In our business, we have enough data. We have too much data. What we don't have is a clear definition of a churning customer, right? So it's not about having the data. I think Verizon is a little bit simpler because as a Verizon customer, it's a yes, no. Either I'm a Verizon customer for this plan or not. I mean, but in our world, at least, there's all kinds of things. There's dentists who are declining in their practice because they're just not practicing the same number of days a week that they were before. I mean, there's offices that we've lost half their business, and I don't know, is that a churning customer? Or are they just taking a break? I mean, the answer to your question is, yeah, we've got the data. What we don't have in our organization, at least, is a clear, agreed upon definition of a churning customer, and then a plan on what to do about that.
You mentioned churn and cost to serve. Are there other sort of big analytics topics that you're looking at, either by function or across the business?
Sure. So, I mean, I could go on forever on this. I'll give you 2 or 3 that are other things that we'd love to understand. How to figure out the right product, the product the customer is going to buy next. I mean, that's a Proton AI thing, but I think we've done pretty well with it. We could do more with it, right? And that's
a harder problem in distribution than it is for a bank, right? So,
I definitely think so. We're selling hundreds of thousands of SKUs. So figuring out the right product to do that, right, is really important. And then there's all kinds of things that we could be doing on a customer experience basis that we're not doing. I can think of one, for example, like a bit, just to give you a longer answer, but this is where data can really help, right? So we have a service operation. So when the dentist's equipment isn't working, we send the service tech out to fix it. Probably a third to half of the time it requires a part, right? So we send the world's greatest service tech, and he gets in there, he says, it's like your dishwasher, right? Oh, you need a part, right? With the worst sentence you could hear. And the second sentence is, and I don't have one on my truck, right? So there's a whole data analytics piece in our business around how can we identify the right parts to put on the right truck, maybe even to put in the customer's office based on the kind of equipment they have, so that when the guy gets there, and they're all guys in our world, we have 1 or 2 females, but the guy gets there to fix it, he says, oh, you need this part, and guess what? I have it on my truck. Or guess what? I know in a drawer in the back, you already have this part ready so that it's ready when I need it. So there's a whole data analytics set around parts that really, will it save money? I guess so. But really what it does is it uses data to create a much better customer experience. That's just one example. There's lots of them in our organization where we could leverage.
Gosh, I love that whole example because we've seen movement toward that in the industrial space, where distributors they've done an industrial automation solution, let's say for a factory, and they know all the stuff that's in the plant, and they're able even to do like a managed service function of health and status monitoring of the equipment. Is that something that also might be in your world?
Absolutely, that's in our future, but it's hard to do, and it's not something that we do naturally. So we're working towards it, especially on the side of the dental. We support, on a very small piece of our business, we support dentists' computer networks, their servers and their software and their hardware. So we're moving towards a managed service plan there. On the dental equipment itself, we've looked at it. It's very hard to figure out what the right way to price it is. That said, it's not about boiling the ocean either. It's about how do we create a better experience today. So the answer to your question is yeah. And if I'm a customer, it's annoying to me. Like I would say, I bought this equipment from you. You must have sold this equipment to lots of other people. I can't be the first customer that has a chair that doesn't go up and down. Why do you not know the three parts it could be? I mean, like,
Yeah.
and as a customer, I'd ask that question all day long. As a distributor, it's hard to figure out, and we work on it every day, but there's just all this opportunity ahead of us to create a much better customer experience than the one we're providing now. Not just us, everyone in our business. It's hard. It's harder than it looks. Easy questions, hard answers.
You know, it's funny because I would not, when I came on this call, I did not think about doing predictive failure and preventative maintenance as a service in this type of distribution. But to your point, it's really, really hard to figure out. But man, the value and the, I guess, subscription revenue could be considerable.
Huge.
I will say this though, Chuck, you know, a lot of times when I talk to distributors, I ask them, do you know how many customers have churned in the last year or last few years? Do you know what the trend is? Do you have a plan to turn it around? Or do you know how many new customers you got, or and what the trend is, and do you have a plan to increase it? Most of them don't. So the fact that you are, you know, you've identified this opportunity, and by the way, one of the things that a lot of distributors don't understand is the upside to keeping a customer multiplies, because customers you retain grow. If they leave, they only go to zero. There's no further downside. But if you keep them, they grow, and the exponential effects of retention are extraordinary if you look at it like on a 5-year basis.
Absolutely. And so when you talk about new customers, I mean, if a customer bought something for the first time, they're clearly a new customer. But if a customer bought something 5 years ago, never bought something since, and now restarted their account, and now they're buying a lot, is that a new customer? All these questions are easy to ask and hard to answer. But I believe, and this is where I think it goes back to what our topic is for today, I believe that we all have the data, and we all have some expertise, and we need to upgrade our expertise so that we get people using the data who can bring us relatively simple but directionally correct answers to relatively simple questions. It's all there. We just aren't. And when I started in this business, 25 years ago, I couldn't answer those questions because we didn't have anybody who could figure out, no AI. No. Now we've got tools that we can actually go and, I believe, answer some of these most vexing questions for distributors, the ones that have been keeping us up at night for generations. They're all within our grasp to answer if we know how to do it. And that goes back to, what are we doing about that? Changing the IT foundational structure, making sure we have the right tools, making sure we have an inventory of all the data sets that we have in the organization, making sure we've got a centralized thinking and strategy around data, and then taking those great people, right, and really figuring out how to leverage them and put them on the right projects, right? So that's really the operational side of this question of, if you have an IT business that just happens to do something else, what would you think? And then what you think is, how do I leverage the data and IT resources that I currently have?
So when we think about the benefit of these initiatives, sometimes the primary benefit is Benco, sometimes the primary benefit is the customer, sometimes it's both. How do you think about these initiatives in prioritizing along these lines?
So that's a great question. One of our core values at Benco is we always start by asking, what would the customer want? And I think that's one of our main differentiators. So I would like to think that the answer to your questions, we always prioritize the benefit to the customer at the top of the list, even at the extent of the things that are mostly benefit Benco and less the customer. I'm not naive. Like, I think if we could identify something that would help us make more money, we'll certainly do that. Mm-hmm. But our value would say, and I think that one of the ways we differentiate ourselves from our publicly held competitors is we have the luxury of, as a family or a family-owned organization, to prioritize customer needs first. So if someone came to me with a list that, asked that question of me, I would definitely say, what are the things here that create a better customer experience? Let's put them at the top of the list always.
And then when you roll it forward, because it is, I think, as we mentioned in the prep, this is a journey, not a destination, right? If you roll this forward a couple, 3 years from now, what does Benco Dental look like a couple, 3 years from now?
Yeah, good question. So number one on the list is, in a couple, 3 years from now, and by the way, in Northeastern Pennsylvania, our preferred phrase is a couple, 2 tree. So here we say a couple, 2 tree. So in a couple, 2 tree years, we are going to have an entirely new IT infrastructure, right? A new ERP system, and then all the connectors that go to it. So we'll have a whole new system, and it will be modernized so that we'll actually be able to make the business more efficient, and we'll actually have better access to the data that it creates and stores. So that's the first thing. That's a non-negotiable. We're actually starting that journey. The second thing is, we're going to have a centralized data and analytics team with roots into the specific functional areas, but a centralized strategy and a centralized group that's working together to provide those data insights in ways that we just don't see today. And then we're going to use and leverage that data to make better business and operational decisions for the business.
Does this sort of enhancement, alignment of your analytical resources, does it change the way that you formulate your strategic plans? I mean, are you sharing more data before you do it? Or, because I know if you don't have this data, there's a lot of arguing during a strategic planning process about what reality is. And, so are they involved? Do they prepare data for you? Do they evaluate your plans? How do you enroll them in this strategic planning process?
It's a great question. So we're in the process of centralizing together and hiring this key person, but I would say one of the main changes that we've made over the past few years is really making our strategic planning process more data driven. So we're about to embark on our 2022 process in a few weeks. And I would say that we're much better today. Not nearly as good as we should be, in my opinion, but we're much better today at gathering data around projects that we want to do, and really looking at insights that really help us float to the top the things that are going to make the biggest difference for customers. In addition to that, one other thing we're trying to do more of is we're trying to adopt more of the lean startup methodology. So we're combining some data with some testing, right? That's the big thing where we could do better. We were really great at coming up with a great idea and then throwing it up against the wall for the entire organization at one time. And then it would fail miserably. And we'd say, like, what went wrong? Well, what went wrong is we missed the testing phase, right? So you got to figure out how to test stuff before you're going to roll it out on a big scale. But we were so confident and so smart, we thought we understood it much better than we did. So yes, it's more data and more data driven, and then more testing. And that's really generating some better strategic insights and projects.
Great.
And at the end of the day, how will this help you compete up, meaning against Schein and Patterson, and how will it help you compete down?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it does a few things for the organization. It creates a better customer experience, right? So I truly believe that, to use an analogy that we talked about a few minutes ago, when a rep walks in and says to a customer, I think you might be interested in a product that, by the way, was in their cart that they didn't buy, I think that's a better customer experience, because we want to have reps who have the right data, who can go in and help customers make the right decisions for their businesses, right? We're a B2B business. So I do believe when we use data to sell more stuff, we're also creating a better customer experience. So how do we measure success is if we have a better NPX score, a better customer experience, that's going to generate better market share and better growth potential. That's how we're going to compete better up and down. In my mind, it's not really up or down. It's really, how do we just create a better customer experience using data? And then we leverage that customer experience to get more customers.
Fantastic. So your metric will boil down to market share and NPX.
I mean, in my opinion, the most important metric is market share, because what it really shows is how valuable we're being to our customers. Not to say that profit and inventory turns aren't also important, but when looking at a project like this, I think the main thing we want to do is create a better customer experience. I mean, in data insights around what the products we need to have in our inventory, that's a better customer experience. Yes, it also makes us more financially successful. But when it comes right down to it, if we don't have the right products in our distribution centers for our customers to buy, we're not making a sale and we're not making them happy.
It's all for naught otherwise, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Man, I tell you, this has been an absolutely fantastic discussion. It's compelling. It's fascinating, Chuck. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been just incredible for us, and I know for our audience as well. So I hope you'll choose to join us again sometime, because we'd love to have you back.
Absolutely. Flattered to be asked. You guys are awesome. And thank you very much for everything you do for wholesale distributors. Big fan of what you're doing, and happy to come back anytime and share stories of what we're doing right. More importantly, what we're doing wrong. It's a little bit like a reality show. What you're doing wrong is a lot more fun than what you're doing right. So happy to share all those too.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. So we really appreciate it. It means a lot, especially coming from you, Chuck. And so anyway, join us on October 6th. We've got a webinar on the state of manufacturer sales channels. There's a lot of data showing that Manufacturers are increasingly selling direct and through marketplaces, but there's still a role for distributors, and distributors can expand that share by doing the right things. On October 20th, we'll be talking about how to integrate field sales, telephone sales, and customer service. So telephone sales is literally outbound calls. It's a sales role that happens over the telephone. How do you make those things work together, get a better return on your sales payroll dollars? You can go to distributionstrategy.com and click on events if you want to register for each of those. Our contact information is at the bottom. If you'd like to go hold of Chuck, reach out to us. We'll pass it along. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. We've enjoyed the discussion. Once more, Chuck, thank you, sir. It's been an honor to have you here. And I hope everyone has a great couple of weeks until we see you online again. Bye now.